This week, we talk about a movie. But Mom, don't you already have a wildly successful show for talking about movies? Why, yes. Yes, I do. But Escape to the Movies is for when movies are new. Sometimes, movies are old. Sometimes, movies are strange. Sometimes, you guessed it,
movies are weird.
So, everybody keeps trying to make Street Fighter movies. There have been goofy, colorful, silly Street Fighter movies, grim and gritty, realistic Street Fighter movies, a couple of animated Street Fighter movies, and if you like Street Fighter, chances are you've seen all of them. Well, folks, I got one you probably didn't see, and might not even know about. After all, they didn't even bother to call it Street Fighter. They called it
Future Cops.
Yes, Future Cops. Alright, here's what happened. Round about 1993 or so, 1 year before the Van Damme movie, notorious Hong Kong movie maker Wong Jing decided he wanted to make a Street Fighter movie. But shockingly, the rights to Capcom's multi-million-dollar cash cow somehow couldn't be secured for a low-budget Chinese-language teen comedy. So Wong Jing went ahead and made that movie anyway, and just changed all the Street Fighter characters' names. This actually used to happen a lot in Chinese-language filmmaking. The finished film ultimately only takes the characters, the special moves, and some of the music and sound effects from the games. The actual plot is like some bizarre mashup of Time Cop, Back to the Future, and Smallville. Though, admittedly, it still has more to do with Street Fighter than The Legend of Chun-Li did. We open in the far-flung future world of 2043, where a team of supervillains are locked in combat with the police, both teams being comprised of characters from Street Fighter. Ken, Honda, Sagat, and of course Bison are the bad guys, while Vega, Guile, Dalsum, and Ryu are the future cops. I'll give them this, the opening action scene is pretty damn cool. Lots of live pyro, lasers, guys on rocket skis, and while the effects aren't great and none of the characters look precisely like who they're supposed to be, it's kind of a trip to see the Street Fighters actually leaping around and using their special moves and powers in live action. And these aren't some small-time Chinese actors either. There's some big names in this. That's Andy freaking Lau as Vega. Anyway, Bison, the bad guy leader, has been captured and is about to stand trial, so his henchmen decide to travel back in time to the 90s and assassinate the judge as a teenager. That strikes me as unnecessarily elaborate, but what do I know? So the future cops have to go back in time too to protect the kid in question. Ryu gets to sit this one out because he married the boss's daughter. This is the best joke the movie has, by the way. The most popular character from the game, and the only one who looks exactly like he's supposed to, immediately exits the movie. Amusingly, Ryu and Ken are played by Chinese pop music superstars Aaron Kwok and Ekin Cheng, who martial arts fans may recognize as Wind and Cloud, the Storm Riders. So Vega, Guile, and Dalsum zap back to 1993 and befriend the judge-to-be, who at this point is an awkward, bullied teenager played by future Taiwanese TV superstar Dickie Chung, the real star and main character of the movie. The hero also has a sister named, wait for it, Chun-Li, played by Qingmei of Naked Killer fame. The future cops infiltrate the hero's school to keep him safe, while the bad guys end up allying themselves with the school bully. Wacky hijinks ensue. How wacky? Here's Guile's big musical number. Just so we're clear, yes, this is a real movie. Oh, and Chun-Li gets a crush on Vega, so they go to a video arcade where he uses his special Future Cop virtual reality powers to take her on a date in Super Mario World. Again, yes, this is a real movie. But then Act 3 rolls around and Bison shows up to handle things personally, so it's time for the insane final battle. The future cops give the other good guys magic pills to grant them the superpowers of their own, so Chun-Li finally assumes her video game form, and Street Fighter fans finally get to see a flesh-and-blood woman execute the spinning bird kick. Chun-Li's mom also turns into another Chun-Li, okay, and the mom's boyfriend turns into Blanca, whose rolling attack is visualized using a giant beach ball. I say again, this is a real movie. And of course, our teenage hero finally faces his fears and takes a magic pill of his own. But he doesn't turn into a Street Fighter character. Oh no, he turns into Goku. Yes, that Goku. The unlicensed Street Fighter movie guest stars unlicensed Goku. And with unlicensed Goku's help, the future cops are able to defeat Bison by discovering his one weakness: being tied up, having a giant hole punched through his chest, and then having an atom bomb shoved into it. Yeah, okay, sounds about right. And there you have it, folks. Future Cops, the Street Fighter movie that, honestly, I would still rather watch than sit through The Legend of Chun-Li again. When I've said in the past you can make a good movie out of anything, I've meant it, and I include other movies in that calculus. That being said, I can appreciate how Americanized remakes might be annoying in principle. Fairly or not, the American pop cultural export already dominates huge chunks of the world's popular culture. Why should we need to borrow other people's creations too? Never mind the fact that oftentimes Hollywood's attempts at Americanization go wrong. Really, really, really wrong. But you know what gets comparatively little attention in all this? The fact that while America is clearly ahead in the foreign remake wars, it's not at all a one-sided fight. Plenty of countries have made their own movies out of American pop culture, in many cases creating oddball masterpieces of their very own, and perhaps scoring some karmic vengeance for the likes of, say, Dragon Ball Evolution. Now, everyone remembers Japanese studio Toho borrowing America's favorite mega ape for King Kong vs. Godzilla, but how many folks know that the 1960s King Kong cartoon was Japanese as well? In fact, it was the first anime ever produced for an American TV studio. They also produced a feature film spin-off of said anime, King Kong Escapes, giving Kong an appropriately manga-esque nemesis, Mecha Kong. Look at him. Look at him. Is that not the most awesome giant robot monkey thing you have ever seen? Also from Japan in 1978 came the live-action version of Spider-Man from Toei. They kept the costume but changed up the origin story so that now Spidey got his powers from a good alien to fight an army of evil aliens. He also had a spaceship that transformed into a robot, which came in handy when the aliens would grow to giant size a la the popular Ultraman series from the same era. Toei ended up liking the spandex-clad superhero plus giant robot concept so much they built an entire original franchise around it, Super Sentai, which Westerners may be more familiar with as Power Rangers, and which continues to this day. And it's not just nerd ephemera either. Zhang Yimou's Imperial-era Chinese action comedy A Woman, a Gun, and a Noodle Shop was a remake of the classic Coen Brothers crime thriller Blood Simple. The Longest Yard got a British remake in the form of Mean Machine. Even Groundhog Day got remade in Italy as Stork Day. But hell, those are all pretty mainstream. You guys want to see the weird stuff, right? Alright, here we go. From Indonesia comes Lady Terminator. She's exactly like the regular Terminator, except she's a lady, and possessed by an ancient sorceress instead of being a robot from the future. Other than that, same thing though. Fun fact about this movie. I'd like to show you some clips, but it's actually pretty nasty, so I can't. Alright, the scenes you're watching right now are from the Indian pseudo-spin-off Fight Club Members Only. Don't get too excited, they pretty much only kept the title and the angry young dude's underground fighting angle from the David Fincher movie. Speaking of India, thanks to the popularity of older Bollywood productions as ironic hipster movie night fodder, many of you have probably heard of the Indian Superman. Okay, what about Turkish Superman? Or hell, Turkish Star Wars? Oh yeah, for a while there, the Turkish movie industry was the king of this stuff, culminating in what may be the weirdest unlicensed pop cultural mashup of all time, Three Dev Adam. Roughly translated as Three Mighty Men, Three Dev Adam finds Istanbul under siege by the evil criminal mastermind, Spider-Man, who seems to be a magnet for these things. How evil is Turkish Spider-Man? He tortures his enemies by having trained guinea pigs eat their eyeballs. Yes, that happens. The only thing that can stop him is an international coalition of heroes, including El Santo, the ultimate legend of Mexican wrestling movies and actual Mexican wrestling. And also, yes, Captain America. Alright, show of hands. Who would have called him as the least likely character to have shown up in this episode? 2011 was not a good year to be a bad guy. Osama bin Laden, dead. Muammar Gaddafi, dead. And then, right near the end, karma caught one more of them. Kim Jong-Il, the supreme leader of North Korea since the death of his father Kim Il-sung in 1994. A tyrannical dictator alleged to have taken as many as 200,000 political prisoners during his reign, Kim Jong-Il was also known for having a flair for the theatrical. That parody of him in Team America may have existed primarily so that Trey Parker and Matt Stone could make uncharacteristically shallow and, let's face it, kind of immediately dated swipes at celebrity activism, but it's not actually that far off. The North Korean state-run media and school systems were instructed to portray him to the public as a kind of living god who could control the weather with his emotions and whose birth was heralded by a double rainbow. And as would befit a man who starved and brutalized his own people while fashioning himself into a real-life James Bond villain, Kim Jong-il was obsessed with the movies, his absolute favorites having been said to include Hong Kong action flicks, Godzilla, Friday the 13th, and Rambo. He even wrote a book on the art of movie making. Now, around here, we're prone to point out that
movies are weird.
But let's face it,
This guy was weirder.
You want to know just how crazy Dear Leader's movie obsession got? Back when he was just, for lack of a better word, merely the prince of North Korea, he kidnapped a director to make movies for him. For real. I cannot stress that enough. The story I'm about to tell you really happened. In 1978, famous South Korean movie director Shin Sang-ok learned that his ex-wife, actress Choi Yun-hee, had disappeared while on a trip to Hong Kong. When Sang-ok went to investigate, he got disappeared himself. To North Korea. After being held in various forms of imprisonment in the country for 5 years, he was reunited with Yun-hee, and the duo learned the reason for their abductions. Kim Jong-il was a fan of their movies, and wanted them to A, get remarried, and B, make more movies together, so North Korea could have a Hollywood of its very own. Shin Sang-ok's service would last several years, but since it's kinda difficult to get anything into or out of North Korea, many of these films haven't been widely seen. But the last one he made actually did wind up getting released by North Korea to outside markets a few decades later. Yes, you can buy and watch a movie that was ordered into being by Kim Jong-il. What could be more surreal than that? Well, the film in question is a period piece giant monster movie. The flick is called PULGASARI and is allegedly based on a North Korean folk legend rewritten as a propaganda piece lionizing the victory of the people over the dictatorial leaders they'd had before embracing communism, as opposed to the dictatorial leaders they had immediately after embracing communism. Anyway, it's feudal-era Korea and the local ruler is forcibly confiscating the peasants' iron tools to make weapons for his army. An imprisoned rebel gives his soon-to-be orphaned daughter a toy monster which, after she accidentally drips some blood on it, comes to life as a heroic creature who gets bigger by eating iron. Yeah, it's a weird one. The monster looks pretty good, though. Kim was apparently so hot to have a Godzilla for his very own, he let the filmmakers contract the special effects work out to the actual Godzilla effects team from Japan. In fact, that's Kenpachiro Satsuma, the second guy who played Godzilla, in the costume. Anyway, PULGASARI eventually grows to giant size and helps the proletariat kick some evil overlord ass. But that's not quite the ending, and this is where things get, theoretically, kinda interesting. See, after PULGASARI gets done wailing on the bad guys, he doesn't go away. Instead, he turns around and demands that the peasants start feeding him the iron instead. Now, no one has ever really confirmed this, but if PULGASARI's rampage against the evil king is supposed to represent the North Korean army's victory over the previous regime, then it's really easy to read his surprise transformation into a bad guy as a stinging critique of the North Korean Communist Party itself. Is it possible that Shin Sang-ok had the stones to metaphorically tell Kim Jong-il off in his own movie? Well, whatever his intentions were, sticking around wasn't among them. In 1986, while attending a film festival in Vienna, Sang-ok and Yun-hee slipped away from their North Korean quote-unquote escorts and sought political asylum at the American embassy, ultimately emigrating to the United States, where he adopted the pseudonym Simon Sheen and continued to write, produce, and direct films. Most notably, all of the Three Ninjas sequels. Yes, I kid you not, they really did make 3 more of those, and they really were made in part by Kim Jong-il's escaped movie servant, and Galgameth, an American remake of PULGASARI. In 1994, Shin Sang-ok returned to his native South Korea after definitively dispelling suspicions that he'd been working for the North voluntarily, where he continued to make films before his death in 2006, upon which he was posthumously awarded the Gold Crown Cultural Medal, the country's top honor for artistic achievement. So the next time you're hearing the hype about some movie and the press guy says, you know, the story behind this one is a little strange, just keep this story in mind. Once upon a time, the dictator of North Korea kidnapped a guy and forced him to make a communist Godzilla movie. In the late 1950s, the Italian movie industry hit a goldmine. By hiring the various athletes and strongmen emerging from the era's booming bodybuilding and fitness fads as actors and utilizing the natural beauty of the Mediterranean wilderness as backdrops, they could stage loose adaptations of iconic historical, biblical, and mythological tales with the added draw of attractive, scantily clad stars while spending very little money. And when 1958's ultra-low-budget Hercules, starring American bodybuilder Steve Reeves, became an unexpected hit in the United States, it touched off a massive international craze for such material, spawning an entire genre of so-called swords and sandals epics. The films are pretty terrible terrible for the most part, and fans of Mystery Science Theater are more than familiar with just how bad it could get. But it's also not hard to see why it was so popular. Consisting almost entirely of beefy, barely clothed muscle men, Hercules and its progeny were essentially porn for women. Oh, and for gay men too, to be sure, but the studio marketing guys were obviously more focused on the women. In particular, they were believed to be hugely popular with stay-at-home mothers of young boys. Junior got a theoretically exciting movie about swords and monsters and heroes, while Mom got ideas. Filthy ideas. And now you know what Dr. Frankenfurter was talking about when he said,
"We could take in an old Steve Reeves movie."
The genre fell out of favor midway into the 60s as spaghetti westerns and James Bond knockoffs became the Italian schlock cinema's new cash cows. But in the early 1980s, the confluence of Conan the Barbarian becoming a surprise mega-hit and the continued popularity of the sci-fi fantasy epics in the wake of Star Wars brought swords and sandals briefly back to life. And it was in this magic moment that the notorious Menahem Golem and Yoram Globus, yep, those guys, decided to bring the tradition of Italian Hercules movies back to life. And the result was a 1983 disaster that is so bad, yet bad in such a completely, uniquely, one-of-a-kind, what the hell were they thinking way, it's gonna take me 2 of these shows to introduce it to you. Kids, this is the stuff that
Movies are weird.
was made for. The first thing you need to know about this movie is that it's much more interested in aping the then-popular stuff like Conan, Masters of the Universe, and Star Wars than it is in recreating Greek mythology. To wit, we open in space. There are apparently only 3 Greek gods, and instead of Mount Olympus, they live on the moon.
They were of the supreme essence and became gods.
Yeah, this was that kind of fun period where European sci-fi had come to mimic the scale and techniques of the Star Wars movies, but were still using design sensibilities straight out of Flash Gordon. Anyway, Earth is apparently full of evil, so to give mankind a fighting chance, the gods brew up a physically perfect superhuman and zap its essence into Hercules, the infant son of the king of Thebes. Unfortunately, that very night, Thebes is overthrown and the king and queen are killed. The traitors are working for Sybil Danning as the sorceress Adriana, who's really there to steal the king's magic sword because... Oh yeah, one other thing about this movie. The what's going on details kinda slip out in reverse, so we don't really know what the hell this thing is even about or why anything is important until it's already happened or basically over. Baby Hercules survives Moses style, and after killing a pair of puppet snakes and experiencing whatever this is,
Put that back in the river.
he's taken in by not Uncle Owen and Aunt Beru and grows up into Lou Ferrigno, the Incredible Hulk himself. I should probably mention that a significant portion of this movie's present-day fanbase is comprised of bodybuilding aficionados, and yeah, it can't be ignored, this is the only Hercules movie where you kinda have to buy the whole strongest man on Earth thing. I mean, the dude is huge, and he can throw a bear into space. The bear had been sent by Hera to kill Herc's adopted dad. Just like in the original myths, Hera is working against Hercules, even though in this version she has no logical reason to do so. So Hera calls in the favor of her earthly minion, King Minos. Believe it or not, this is our main bad guy, though of course they won't bother explaining why until the end of the damn movie. Minos, meanwhile, subcontracts his Kill Hercules job to... In Greek mythology, Daedalus is an elderly inventor. In this movie, Daedalus is a sexy Power Rangers villain. Good change. Her plan is to kill Hercules with robots. Oh yeah, in this version, all the Greek mythological monsters are robots. Best to just go with it.
And on hitting the Earth's atmosphere, it will grow. It will grow. Big, huge.
So Herc defeats the flying robot fish, I guess, but fails to save the life of his adopted mother. So he sets off on a quest to find himself that for some reason involves sword fighting, beating up random guys with a log, messing with some chariots, and diverting a river to clean out the world's filthiest stables. Because if you're only going to keep one thing from the original story, it should be the part about the hero cleaning up horse poop. These labors win Hercules the love of Princess Cassiopeia. Until...
Here.
Find out what happens and how much dumber this movie gets next time.
Where was I? Hercules.
When last we left our look back at one of the most ridiculous movies ever made, 1983's Hercules starring Lou Ferrigno, Hercules, the orphan son of a deposed king imbued with superhuman strength by the ancient Greek moon gods, had used his powers to throw a bear into space, fight a robot, wrestle some random guys, clean a stable, and woo Princess Cassiopeia. Unfortunately, he and Cassiopeia are abducted by Adriana, the sorceress who masterminded the murder of Herc's birth parents. Oh, she's also the daughter of our weirdly ineffectual main bad guy, King Minos.
We have to eliminate Hercules.
Yeah, you see what I mean about how this movie kind of forgets what order to reveal important information in? Hercules gets tossed into the world's shallowest ocean and washes up on a mysterious island, and this is the point where the movie becomes the live-action equivalent of watching somebody play Dragon Quest.
Ugh.
The island is inhabited by the good witch Circe, who needs some of Hercules' blood to restore her to youth.
Who are you?
Circe reveals that she has a magic amulet that can teleport them to Minos' kingdom, but only Herc can retrieve it. So, after battling Daedalus' next killer robot...
The last one didn't work so well, you know.
It spits cosmic rays of deadly fire.
They go down to the underworld, which for some reason involves crossing a rainbow bridge, and arrive on the cover of a progressive rock album so Hercules can undergo the trials of ice and fire and get the amulet.
Resist! Only you can do it!
The talisman.
Circe then reveals that she was lying and the amulet can only get them part of the way there.
This does not look like the island of Thera. This does not look like the place.
And to go the rest of the way, they'll need to go get a magic chariot from the King of Africa. Yes, the King of Africa, who will only give Herc the chariot if he does some mountain moving for him.
But how will you do it?
Just wait and see.
In case you're wondering, no, this seemingly really useful turn me into a giant power is never used again. The magic chariot, by the way, doesn't come with any magic horses to pull it, but Herc has a plan for that too.
I need a rope tied around this stone, sorceress.
I think that kind of speaks for itself, right? And yeah, that finally gets them to Minos' kingdom, which we now find out is supposed to have been Atlantis, by the way, and it's time for another brief robot battle. Which ends with Circe dead. You know, Hercules kind of sucks at the whole hero thing. He's had to protect exactly 3 people total throughout this whole movie, and they all died. Oh, and King Minos finally explains the plot.
The pure magic of perfect knowledge. Science is impeccable. It's the sword that holds the key to my power. Beyond this point, the Phoenix cannot rise.
You captured the Phoenix?
Just as the Phoenix is renewed in the destruction of its own ashes, so my strength is renewed every summer of the 7th equinox when I offer it a virgin bride. This night, Cassiopeia, you will become bride of the Phoenix.
Yep, it's now the end of the movie, and we now learn what the story was. So, Herc storms the castle, fights some guards, and Minos busts out his ultimate weapon, the Rainbow Fire Sword. Let's watch.
You're too reliant on your strength, my hero. You look muscle-bound, but you're pretty agile, aren't you?
This sword consecrated to Zeus fears nothing! Are you really Cassiopeia? Or Ariana in a new form? Or Circe reborn?
I'm all of them and none of them. I'm the one who truly loves you.
And yeah, that's pretty much the movie. They actually did make a sequel to this, but it's not really trying as hard, so it's not nearly as fun. So, how did this happen? Well, it's actually kind of hard to say. It is known that the original director Bruno Mattei was replaced early on by Luigi Cozzi, aka Louis Coates, who was at the time better known for sci-fi movies like Star Crash. Sybil Danning, who played Adriana, has claimed that the original intent of the production was to make a true successor to the Italian Hercules movies of old, with the sex and violence, sex in particular, turned way the hell up to beat Conan at its own game, but that Ferrigno, whose name recognition they were counting on to sell the damn thing, was more interested in making a movie for kids. That makes a lot of sense, actually, though apparently Danning and Ferrigno Ferrigno were already on unfriendly terms before the film began, so maybe take that with a grain of salt. However it happened, Hercules is a bad movie I keep with me just in case. You never know when a party is going to be winding down or some folks in an enhanced state of mind will be visiting, and you might need something this outlandish to throw on in the background. Go on, give the whole thing a watch and you'll see what I mean. Just don't say I didn't warn you. So, did you see the remake of ROBOCOP this weekend? Well, if the box office totals are anything to go by, you probably did not. I'd like to think that the bottomed-out ticket sales are the result of the movie sucking, and the audience realizing that, but it's more likely a case that the movie never looked all that good to begin with, and ROBOCOP's brand name just doesn't have the cachet that it used to. Which isn't all that surprising, given that without exaggeration, everything related to ROBOCOP since the first movie, other than that pretty awesome arcade game, well, has been kinda terrible. But for a moment there, back in the 80s and a bit of the 90s, ROBOCOP was everywhere. Not so much in the official product, but in influence. The original movie was so popular, it quickly became one of the most ripped-off movies ever. Some of that was the title. It was pretty easy to just stick the word robo in front of another word and tell audiences, hey, this is going to be kind of similar to RoboCop. But also, the basic look of one humanoid robot killing bad guys was pretty affordable to replicate. You gotta spend some money to rip off something like Star Wars, but RoboCop, one guy in a robot costume, and it's kinda okay if you can tell it's a costume, that's not too expensive, really. A lot of these knockoffs originated in Japan, Hong Kong, and the South Pacific, which isn't really surprising given that RoboCop looks visually very similar to characters from Toei's Metal Heroes tokusatsu series from Japan that have always been popular throughout that region. In fact, one of the earliest examples of that genre was Robotokaiji, or Robot Detective, in the 1970s, and the designers of RoboCop's suit specifically cited 1982's Space Sheriff Gavan as a major influence. So in 1988, Toei returned that favor with Mobile Cop Japan, which was your basic Metal Hero show but made to visually reference RoboCop as much as possible. Damn, but these things all have catchy theme songs. Also from Japan, 1990's Lady Battle Cop. Yep, that's a lady battle cop, alright. Meanwhile, Hong Kong, which actually wasn't big on sci-fi in the 80s for a number of reasons, borrowed the shiny robot with human face look for the bizarre action romance buddy comedy I Love Maria, which was for obvious reasons retitled RoboForce elsewhere in the world. In this one, a crook who gets kicked out of his gang for being too nice teams up with a cop who got kicked out of being a cop for being too nice. And they find a sexy robot girl who's actually a robot duplicate of the gang leader's girlfriend that they reprogram to be good and fight the gang's other bigger robot. There were Canadian and American knockoffs too, like Rotor and Vindicator, and Italy gave us Robo War, which is actually a Predator knockoff but with soldiers fighting a RoboCop instead of an alien. That sounds awesome. But it's not. The most notorious, though, is probably still Robo-Vampire, which despite the title is, sort of, actually about a robot who fights vampires, rather than a robot who is also a vampire itself. But you get the idea. Production is credited to the infamous Hong Kong auteur Godfrey Ho, best known for those bizarre 80s ninja movies the internet rediscovered a few years back. In this one, a Hong Kong drug cartel has hired a Taoist priest to make them a team of vampires to act as hired muscle. The novelty here is that these guys are Zhengxi, or traditional Chinese vampires, who have stiffened joints, wear dynastic burial robes, and jump from place to place rather than walking. Remember P.O.N.P. from Super Mario Land? Yeah, that's what he was supposed to be. Zhengxi are an important element of traditional folklore throughout much of China, but to be honest, they've always ended up looking kind of silly in live-action movies. Yeah. They've also got a vampire beast, which is basically a Zhengxi with a gorilla head and a weird subplot about the priest being harassed by a female ghost who claims to be the beast's former girlfriend. This movie is weird.
Peter, I'll still love you forever!
Anyway, a soldier they send to fight the vampires gets killed, and they rather nonchalantly decide to turn his body into a cyborg, which, you know what, I'm just gonna let you watch.
So how's Tom?
It was a fatal wound. He's dead.
Since Tom's dead, I want to make use of his body to create an android-like robot, Mr. Glenn. I would appreciate your approving my application. Are you assured of success? Mm-hmm.
No, really though, that's the robot. Ah, good times. The first thing that needs to be understood about the infamy of Howard the Duck is that the entertainment journalism and long-term career survival in Hollywood are both based on Monday morning quarterbacking. For example, a week ago, basically everyone was celebrating the fact that a movie as delightfully bizarre and offbeat as Guardians of the Galaxy, a nearly $200 million budgeted sci-fi comedy featuring a talking raccoon, was officially a record-breaking smash hit. And with good reason, especially when you consider something that idiosyncratic was able to make it through the Disney Marvel sausage factory. But here's the flip side. Sure, when you pull something like that off and it works, you're a genius, a visionary who saw through the fog and went their own way. But if Guardians had been exactly the same movie but hadn't connected with audiences to the same level, the universal smug response from the peanut gallery would have been, well, what did you expect to happen? You made a f***ing space raccoon movie. Howard the Duck is neither as strange or as wonderful as Guardians of the Galaxy, not by a long shot, but make no mistake, if it had made money, the story would have been that George Lucas had another project no one else believed in that he turned into a hit, and even if we realized it was bad later on, it would have been chalked up to, well, it was the 80s, it was LA, cocaine is a hell of a drug. Anyway, George Lucas, along with a lot of America for a minute there, had been a big fan of the Howard the Duck comic book in college. In the late 70s, he had optioned the movie rights along with his friends Willard Hoyek and Gloria Katz. Their plan, faithfully adapt the Howard comics into an adult-skewing animated feature. For context, this was the moment in time, not uncoincidentally during the Great Fallow period for Disney, when it almost looked like adult animation was going to go mainstream in the United States, with projects like Ralph Bakshi's Fritz the Cat adaptation and the incendiary Coonskin becoming minor pop culture phenomenons. In fact, many cartoon historians blamed 20th Century Fox for inadvertently killing this movement by pulling Bakshi's ambitious epic wizards from theaters to make room for Star Wars. In any case, Lucas' plans to animate Howard hit a snag due to the burgeoning young mogul's loaded work schedule. He was still under a certain studio contract that had him owing one more live-action movie, the deadline for which was getting closer, so Lucas and company hit on a solution. If the whole point of the comic was Howard was the only thing like him, why not shoot the movie in live action and get the miracle workers at ILM to bring the duck to life in live-action feature?
This is obviously no place for an intelligent, sensitive duck.
Well, that would be why. Howard was a technically impressive suitmation effect for the time, but he was still very obviously a little person actor wearing a puppet head, and especially when contrasted with how expensive and elaborate the rest of the film was, yeah, it was distracting. But if Howard looking fake was the only problem, it still might have worked. The real problem was tone. The movie is simply all over the place. Steve Gerber's original Howard comics were absurdist parodies of real funny animal books, comic book tropes in general, pop culture, and existential grousing about the human condition. But Kat's screenplay for the film tries to marry that absurdity to an otherwise straight sci-fi story that also tries to incorporate the it's funny because he's a duck gags from the comic. The result, a complete mess that sometimes feels like a kid's movie.
I'm stranded here, shipwrecked.
Look at this wonderful exhibit.
You see what I mean?
Sometimes feels like a naughty spoof for adults.
Who'd they interview this month?
And mostly just feels uncomfortable.
What I don't know is what the hell I'm doing here.
In the movie, Howard is an alien from a planet of ducks who gets randomly zapped to Earth and befriends a struggling musician played by Leah Thompson. Together, they discover that Howard's displacement was an accident caused by an experimental interstellar laser that has also caused a scientist played by Jeffrey Jones to become possessed by an alien entity called the Dark Overlord, whose invasion of Earth can only be stopped by Howard the Duck. Because reasons. The movie can't decide from scene to scene what the punchline of its own joke is. Sure, the comics played fast and loose with how much personhood Howard actually had for laughs in the old Looney Tunes tradition, but the movie does it from scene to scene. Sometimes people think he's a mascot.
It's so lifelike and realistic.
Bug off.
Excuse me?
Sometimes they're afraid.
No, wait.
Sometimes they don't even seem to notice.
Must be mating season.
At one point, Howard runs afoul of what we today call douchebags who decide that since he's a duck, why not cook him and eat him?
Getting fried!
Where's the SPCA when you need them? I am not amused. I'm gonna barbecue your bill, Bird. Don't just sit there. This is serious. They're gonna cook me. Take that.
And various other people on hand at the time just seem to go along with that, even though the duck is wearing clothes and talking. And then there's the infamous almost bestiality scene.
It's just that you're so incredibly soft and cuddly.
Bev, let's be realistic. I mean, my apartment's zillions of miles from here. You're 3 feet taller than I am.
I just can't resist your intense animal magnetism.
Whoops.
Which is technically supposed to be Beverly calling Howard out on his own macho posturing, but it mostly feels uncomfortable. Then it drops the comedy altogether for a big laser battle against the Dark Overlord in his final form for Act 3.
Oh boy! Filthy! Beverly! All right. Slice salami!
The film came out in 1987 and bombed spectacularly, with everyone and their mother rushing to be the first to say, "What did you expect? You made a f***ing duck movie." It was the first major black eye for the one-time wonderkin Lucas, and would later be remembered as the beginning of his step backwards from an active mega-producer. But for a generation of kids who later see it on VHS because, hey, it looks like a kid's movie and occasionally feels like one, it kinda got sealed into our memories as some kind of cult classic. Mostly because the weirdly out-of-place adult content made it feel like one of those Ghostbusters-type movies, where we were into the main story, but we were also pretty sure we were getting away with something by watching it. If you've ever known a Generation X movie nerd, they've probably at one point tried to convince you that Howard the Duck is either a misunderstood classic or some meaningful benchmark of badness, when really it's just a movie that doesn't work. But now's as good a time as any. Give it a watch, decide for yourself, so you can have an opinion just in case they actually do try this again. So, this weekend's Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles movie kinda sucked ass, huh? What a shocker! There were such talented people involved with such quality pedigrees. Of course, it also made a whole lot of money either way, which is good because I'm just gonna love having two unspeakably awful reboot franchises for the paranoid and the delusional to angrily generate conspiracy theories about the bias. In all seriousness, I'm kind of annoyed that this movie was as bad as it was, both because I had to watch it, and will now probably have to watch more, and because its badness will make folks who wrote it off at the beginning because of superficial changes it made to what they consider the canon of these characters' appearances and backstory feel vindicated in their hang-ups. I'm sorry guys, but the movie was bad because it was bad, straight up. Besides, revisions and reboots are built into this franchise's DNA. So many comics, cartoons, movies, TV shows, all of them with different origin stories and status quos. By now it's almost like tweaking the setup is the reason to make a new version, as though TMNT is now some archetypal modern myth and the originality shines through in what each new storyteller adds or subtracts themselves. Yeah, I'm partial to the 80s version, but it does have its share of flaws. Yes, I like the original Underground comics too, but there's a reason this thing didn't go worldwide until Playmates and Fred Wolf got their hands on it. The Mirage comics had an authentic, lived-in New York City in the 80s grit, but the built-in interchangeability of the characters prevented them from evolving far beyond the single-joke Frank Miller parody they began as, while the series and its attendant merchandising had personality to spare but all the substance of a supermarket piñata. It's enough to make you think that the best version of this might come from combining the better elements of both, and by make you think, I of course mean make you remember that's exactly what the best version of this did.
I have always liked Cowabunga.
Huh?
The original Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles movie may not be a great film, but it's a damn good one, and in my mind easily the best overall piece of media to be made out of this property so far. A kid-friendly equivalent to the urban vigilantism movies that were so popular at the time, filled out with exactly the right level of character-appropriate hijinks and injections of real-world gravity.
It's kind of like moonlighting, isn't it?
The story is simple but efficient, considering how bizarre all the pieces are. The Shredder, a criminal mastermind from Japan, is assembling New York's ample supply of disaffected, homeless, and otherwise vulnerable street kids into an increasingly efficient gang modeled on a feudal ninja clan from which he descends. Splinter, an old enemy of the Shredder, has raised the Turtles as a force for good. The evil ninjas target a newspaper reporter, the good ninjas team up with a fellow human vigilante to protect her, the battles come home and ultimately spill out onto the streets. Nice and straightforward, no muss, no fuss.
You guys must be studying the abridged book of ninja fighting.
It basically ports over an outline of stories from the early comics, but reworks the Turtles into approximations of their more distinguishable personalities from the cartoons, and that juxtaposition gives the film a really unique aesthetic.
It's the news lady. Can we keep her?
The action is good. It's genuinely funny. The Foot Clan is an urban gang version of Pinocchio's Pleasure Island, is an interesting hook to hang the plot on.
You are here because the outside world rejects you. This is your family. I am your father.
And the film believes in its characters enough to stop the fights and the jokes for that extended, mellow, chilling out section on the farm.
It's strange being back on the old farm. Even after all these years, it still feels like home. The Turtles are four once again, and yet still not whole. A lingering doubt remains, an unknown which they can't bear to face. Their greatest fear.
It's hard to imagine a moment like this in the new version.
Always remember the true force that binds you. The same as that which brought me here tonight. That which I gladly return with my final words. I love you all, my sons.
And also, Sam Rockwell was in it. Look how young he was.
You got any cigarettes?
Regular or menthol?
In all seriousness, though, the movie just worked. Yes, the budget showed through at times, and the fight scenes lean a little heavy on slapstick to conceal the limited movement available in the otherwise very impressive Jim Henson-designed turtle suits. Yes, the subplot with the troubled kid doesn't totally gel. But the way the whole thing subtly crystallizes the usually convoluted Splinter, Shredder, Turtles, Foot Clan conflict into a collision of ideals between good and bad surrogate parenting.
The Shredder uses you. He poisons your minds to obtain that which he desires. He cares nothing for you or the people you hurt.
We're a family. Family? You see what you said, family? You call this here and that down there family?
Gets to a depth that none of the later films can effectively match, and that last fight scene kills. Look, there have been Ninja Turtle movies since then, and there'll almost certainly be more to come, but I really do hope whoever takes over a decade or so, give or take, once this current lost cause has run its course, remembers that one time, someone actually did get this right.
Whoa! God, I love being a
turtle!
Movies are weird.
Cutie Honey was a 1970s manga by Japanese comics legend Go Nagai. Nagai is an eccentric figure even in the field of Japanese comics and animation. His most lasting worldwide pop culture contribution will probably remain creating the entire super robot genre of human-piloted mechs with Mazinger, aka Tranzor Z, but in his homeland and among hardcore otakus worldwide, his name carries a more infamous legacy. His late 60s manga Harenchi Gakuen, or Shameless School, is considered the first introduction of explicit erotic situations, sexual humor, and graphic violence into a manga ostensibly aimed at a young audience. So he's basically the guy you can thank for inventing, "Nah, these ain't cartoons for kids. See, this one's got got boobs in it. Now, he also made Devilman, Violence Jack, and Kekko Kamen, but one of his most famous other creations was Cutie Honey, a 1970s curiosity that looked like a magical girl superheroine story for girls, but was actually a sexy softcore parody of tokusatsu superhero characters aimed at teenage boys. The main character, Honey Kisaragi, is an android who resembles a teenage girl that can transform her appearance either for disguise or utilize special costumes and powers to battle the terrorist organization Panther Claw. The main hook of the series being that her costume changes take slightly longer than instant to happen, meaning that she's frequently glimpsed in the nude between changes. Because anime. The live-action movie made in 2004 was one of the first successful attempts at what has become a big business translating manga and anime-style visuals to live action, updating the story from its usual schoolgirl setting to urban Tokyo, and Honey into a college-age young woman who moonlights as an office worker, while her other teen or child characters from the manga and anime versions are aged up into a cop and a news reporter, respectively. It stars Eriko Sato as Honey, introduced to the audience while taking a bubble bath. Because it's that kind of movie. Hey look, a cat! Anyway, the premise is that the evil Panther Claw organization is abducting young women to be used as a power source toward world domination by their leader, Sister Jill, who requires Honey's transformation power source to complete the process, whatever that is. To that end, she orders her lieutenants,
Black Crow,
Cobalt Crow,
Gold Crow,
Scarlet Crow,
to abduct Honey's creator, Professor Kisaragi. Goldclaw goes first so we can get a taste of what we're in for. Yeah, this is actually the movie. And then Honey shows up. Goldclaw is defeated, but Honey becomes the obsession of a tough cop named Natsuko she rescued during the gunfight. Natsuko, in turn, becomes obsessed with discovering the secrets of both Panther Claw and the mysterious vigilante, who has also drawn the attention of a reporter named Seiji, who may or may not actually be a secret agent. Oh hey, I forgot to mention that Sister Jill is actually some kind of gigantic magical tree monster who has a butler and her own theme song, which is in English for some reason.
Sister Jill, such a glorious beauty, we live to serve you.
Anyway, since Honey didn't know that Panther Claw still had 3 other mini-bosses to throw at the problem, the professor winds up kidnapped anyway, leaving Natsuko and Seiji as her only allies. Honey is informed of this information while doing underwear aerobics while talking to a cat, because it's that kind of movie. During a battle with Cobalt Claw, who is interesting, Honey experiences actual fear and anger for what is apparently the first time, unleashing her full power to somewhat frightening results. This leads to an odd tonal shift in the second act, where without the professor to guide her, Honey becomes depressed and despondent, so Seiji and Natsuko step in to fill the mentor role she clearly needs, which means they all get hammered and do karaoke. The character dynamic here is interesting because it's all about subtext and undercurrent. In the anime and manga versions, it's usually explicit that Honey immediately becomes an object of sexual fixation for every man, woman, or miscellaneous she comes into contact with. And while it's fairly clear in this version that Natsuko appears to be crushing on Honey and Seiji on the both of them, it stays just under the surface, largely because Honey is being played as a Frankenstein's monster, naive, childlike mind in a full-grown adult body type of android, and doesn't appear to have a concept of what sexuality is, much less what hers might be. Either way, everything climaxes in an attack on Panther Claw's suddenly revealed fortress, in which Honey battles the alarming Scarlet Claw, and Black Claw, whose sword is also a microphone and travels with a backup orchestra.
Black Crow in a
before finally taking on Sister Jill in the form of an abstract light show climax wherein evil is destroyed by the powers of love and friendship. Gee, this was a Gainax production, did you say? I'm shocked. Cutie Honey is bizarre, but also kind of wonderful. It remains one of the best attempts at making anime action work with human actors, even if the result sometimes looks like history's most elaborately photographed cosplay convention. Still, if this sort of thing be your thing, you kinda owe it to yourself to check this one out. It's pretty terrific.
Movies are weird!
Based loosely on a 1986 comic book, Mr. Go was a 2013 Korean-Chinese co-production built around a reworking of its original premise, but mostly around establishing its filmmakers and special effects animation house Dexa Digital as a primetime player in the feature film CGI game. In other words, a blockbuster of the type familiar to watchers of the Chinese and Korean big-budget film scene of the time. The prove we can pull this off Hollywood-style family crowd pleaser, where internal logic takes a backseat to, yeah, that would look cool. In any case, Mr. Go is about a Chinese circus gorilla who's been trained to hit home runs with a baseball bat who gets signed by a South Korean baseball team to come and do that based on the Bud principle of no one ever technically making a rule that says they aren't allowed to do that.
만 구성된 구인이 9명이 이런 표현은 사실상 없지 않습니까?
아니 실력과 야구를 다 안다고 해도 이건 너무나 비상식이고
인간이 인간에게 더 위험하죠. 길들여진 동물이 비이성적인 인간보다 훨씬 더 안전하니까. 이 사진 다 기억하시죠? 지린성의 영웅. 제가 이렇게 들어드릴게. 잘 보이게. 보세요.
And if you're thinking, okay, a movie about teaching a gorilla to hit baseball sounds pretty interesting, Mr. Go is not that movie. In fact, the film essentially opens by matter-of-factly saying, so yeah, we're a circus and we taught a gorilla to play baseball. That seemed like a thing to do, you know? And then dives directly into the main plot setup. The gorilla, technically known as Ling Ling, is the performing partner of a Chinese-raised circus orphan named Wei Wei, who saddled with the role of ringmaster in a mountain of debt owed to sleazy gangsters after the death of her adoptive grandfather, accepts an offer to bring Ling Ling across the border to play in the KBO major leagues from a publicity-chasing super agent named Sung, infamous in the league as the human bounty hunter for his skill at signing new talent, but also quickly shuffling them out of Korean baseball into the more lucrative Japanese and American major leagues. Oh, there's also a quickly introduced subplot about the circus trying and failing to teach a more aggressive, impossible-to-tame breed of mountain gorilla named Lei Ting to also pitch.
Mountain gorillas are not breedable in a man-made zoo, okay? They're very different from lowland gorillas. They're antisocial and they're aggressive.
You know, so much for wondering where Act 3 is going to go. But yeah, there's your basic movie. Wei and Ling, rechristened Mr. Go for marketing purposes, adapt to sports celebrity life in the big city and the tensions of the backroom contract politics between Sung, the KBO, the team manager, and the owners of interested rival Japanese baseball clubs who might want to sign the gorilla for themselves. And if you're thinking, that sounds like a lot of sports business politics for a monkey baseball movie, you'd be right. That's the main thing that makes Mr. Go even more bizarre than its premise would already suggest. It's a lot more like Moneyball than it is like Air Bud, mostly on the basis that the only way its visual hook can exist is to assume Mr. Go himself exclusively hits massive home runs, as opposed to having to shoot complicated scenes of baseball strategy with the impressive CGI gorilla.
굴렸어요? 아, 이게 뭡니까? 이게 야구가 이러면 안 되죠. 팬들 다 떠나고 야구하고 어디서 굴리고 다시 날려버립니다.
Otherwise, it just kind of assumes that the basic beats of a fish-out-of-water lovable doofus sports star comedy will be consistently funny so long as you can always go, oh hey, there's a gorilla there. That shouldn't be. The answer to which turns out to be, yeah, pretty much.
자, 건배. 아, 이 새끼 술 좀 하네.
삼루. 날려버렸어요. 삼루수 날아갔어요. 자, 홈으로 한 번. 전력 질주하는 미스터 고! 홈승부 갑니다. 홈으로 포스가 홈을 버립니다.
Again, this whole run of early 2010s FX-heavy Chinese-backed family comedies, whether produced wholly in mainland China or otherwise, as is the case here, tends to have a very specific reverse-engineered from its own advertising feel to it, and Mr. Go has this vibe even more than most, with the things are going well portion of its second act compressed almost entirely into what is basically the trailer for Mr. Go, an extended slapstick montage of monkey baseball pratfalls and money shots set to Dire Straits' Walk of Life, aka sports movie trailer song number 5. Though, to its credit, this is mostly so the plot can take a somewhat unexpected leftward turn during the otherwise de rigueur pre-Act 3 All Is Lost moment. Wherein Mr. Go is facing a sports injury, the bad gorilla has shown up signed to a rival team, and where the film takes a moment for Sung to raise the issue of, this isn't at all how gorillas actually work, and it's kind of absurdly suspect that anyone is just taking this kid's word that she can speak gorilla or Ling Ling has been doing anything other than what he wanted to this whole time. Wait, is our entire premise just completely stupid and we've just been going along with it because we also thought baseball gorilla would be fun to do for a while? Were we just gonna keep running with this until someone got seriously hurt? Of course, Mr. Go is a family movie, so once the good and less good but really just misunderstood gorillas have had their showdown and lessons have been learned and there's a nice happy ending, reaffirmation for family and what really matters, and, all things considered, I'm not sure there's a better movie you could make out of this concept. Things work out basically okay. The film actually disappointed at the Korean box office since it opened against some fairly stiff competition from both home and abroad, which might be why they didn't bother bringing this to the United States in official capacity, but it was a surprisingly huge hit in China. It also ends with a tease for a sequel, which they probably aren't going to make, but I still kinda really want to see it if I'm being honest. But, yeah, that's Mr. Go. You asked, and now you know what that is. Rambo: Last Blood will be in theaters this weekend, representing likely the first time the okay, yeah, I guess that one is technically true. The enduring Rambo action franchise will be viewable in theaters for at least one generation of hypothetical fans. Well, at this point, he's probably fought his way back to being primarily associated with the Rocky movies. For a long time, John J. Rambo was the role that defined the pop culture image of actor Sylvester Stallone, especially in the way that the character and eponymous series mirrored the arc of his own unique career. An unexpected success story alternately derided and grudgingly praised by critics, embraced by audiences, but also just as often dropped and skidding wildly off the road so often you'd think, well, that's never coming back, but then, nope, there he is again.
We've seen Sylvester Stallone rise and fall, fall further, and then somehow rise again. Who could survive Rhinestone? He's not human, I tell ya!
Anyway, here's how we got here.
Sylvester Stallone. This time, he's fighting for his life. First Blood.
Released in 1982, First Blood was a lean, mid-scale actioner based on a pitch-dark thriller novel released with solid reception a decade earlier, but increased in notoriety when Stephen King began using it as one of his textbooks while teaching a writing class at the University of Maine. Both the film and book are about a homeless drifter and Vietnam veteran named Rambo who suffers a psychological breakdown after being harassed for vagrancy by a sheriff's department of a small mountain town and eventually engages them in armed combat in the surrounding forest and mountains, whereupon they're informed by his subsequently arriving commanding officer that John Rambo is not simply a soldier but the last of an elite Green Beret unit, a one-man army against whom they stand little chance and whose mind was pushed to the breaking point by his experiences in the war. The novel is a pitch-dark, black-as-night read wherein Rambo is explicitly out of his mind, murders several people, and ends in a mutually destructive standoff. The film adaptation, reworked multiple times at Stallone's behest, retained the grimy bleakness and apocalyptic 1970s sense of a fallen world order, but tipped the moral nuance several degrees more in Rambo's favor. He mainly fights defensively, his pursuers are much more unreasonable, save for Richard Crenna's Colonel Troutman, and Rambo himself is a lot more, well, sensitive than he is on the page. Yeah, this is what people always got wrong about Stallone. In the beginning, he was the action guy whose characters were always crying, emoting, looking and talking about their feelings. Rambo is a pissed-off rage machine in First Blood, but instead of a showdown, and the definitely not coming back for more of these send-off like the book, the film gives him a soliloquy.
It wasn't my war. You asked me, I didn't ask you. Don't end it like this. Back there I can fly a gunship. I can drive a tank. I was in charge of $1 million equipment. Back here I can't even hold a job. Fucking cars! Ah! Thank you.
Incidentally, if you only know the Rambo movies from action montages on YouTube and thus don't know that the Rambo theme has lyrics, it does. Hoo yeah. So everyone thought this was going to be a huge bomb. The first cut was 3.5 hours long. Stallone wanted to buy it and dump it, but instead they cut it down to a 90-minute get-to-the-point version, and it was a solid hit. What mostly seemed to connect was Rambo himself and the differentness of his character. Action movies had been using the disturbed Nam-Vet plot point for a while, but centering one as a sympathetic anti-hero lashing out at both the war and civilian public turning its back on veterans like them as proxies just wasn't something you saw all the time, and while the film itself is as morally gray as it can get while still letting the audience be nominally on the protagonist's side for the most part, John Rambo became, for some, a macho survivalist icon and symbol of unpaid debts of honor to veterans, well outpacing the film itself, which is how you get the sequel. Rambo First Blood Part 2 is about as different from First Blood as you can get and not be making a parody of overblown sequels to small, relative, thoughtful movies themselves. Like, imagine if Will Smith at The Pursuit of Happiness woke up the next day as Will Smith in Independence Day. Almost like that. Arguably the quintessential non-satirical political action film of the mid-80s, First Blood Part 2 is a revenge war movie where one guy gets revenge for an entire war.
Sir, do we get to win this time?
On the guys he fought against, on the government he fought for, and on a different government that just kind of shows up also. The premise is that the army will let Rambo out of prison early if he'll do a recon mission back to Vietnam to take spy photos to confirm whether or not there are still American POWs being held there, but when he discovers that yeah, there are, and also the Soviet Union is in Nam now giving the Viet Cong fancy new weapons, sure, the army tries to leave him behind to cover up the whole oh shit we did leave prisoners there situation. Rambo, not happy about this. But but fortunately either prison has been really good for his health, or the nation of North Vietnam, the Soviet war machine, and the jungle itself are a lot easier to dispatch than a bunch of Midwestern deputies were in the last movie. Yeah, this movie is really dumb, but if you can look past the dumb, it's also one of the most exhilarating action films of its type ever produced, and it's easy to see why people are still copying its aesthetic to this day. Although the only thing more impressive than the action is the acrobatics it pulls off in its final moments, trying to affect both Reagan-era patriotism and retain First Blood's nihilistic neutrality.
The war, everything that happened here may be wrong, but damn it, don't hate your country for it. Hey, I die for it. And what is it you want?
I want what they want. And every other guy who came over here and spilt his guts and gave everything he had once for our country to love us as much as we love it. That's what I want.
Rambo 3, on the other hand, is the least ambiguous about any of this business and also the least interesting, at least in terms of what's actually on screen. In that one, Rambo has to fight the Soviets again, this time in Afghanistan, to rescue Colonel Trotman, and ends up fighting on the side of the Mujahideen rebel army in order to do so. The film explicitly connects the idea of the Soviet-Afghan War having been the USSR's equivalent to Vietnam as a kind of full-circle character evolution for Rambo himself, and the original ending was supposed to feature the hero sticking around to join the rebels permanently, which would have made this a really awkward movie instead of just a boring one a few years later, considering where things went in Afghanistan immediately after that.
If you'd studied your history, you'd know that these people have never given up to anyone. They'd rather die than be slaves to an invading army. You can't defeat a people like that. We tried. We already had our Vietnam. Now you're going to have yours.
Stallone and Rambo had a long even for Stallone, who again has ended and revived his career a lot, stretch of extended why did we ever like that time in the pop culture zeitgeist, with the caricature that Rambo had evolved into becoming a go-to scapegoat for everything the next several cycles of action heroes were trying to get away from. Oh, and between 2 and 3 they also did a cartoon.
Get me Rambo. Canyons of skyscrapers to the canyons of remote mountain peaks, Liberty's champion is unstoppable. Helped by the mechanical genius known as Turbo, and the master of disguises named Cat, the honor-bound protector of the innocent, Rambo, the force of freedom.
Yeah, that wasn't a good idea. But then in 2006, Stallone scored another improbable comeback hit with Rocky Balboa, aka the last Rocky movie, which we've now done 2 sequels to, which got people talking about another Rambo, and yeah, simply titled just that, 2008's Rambo was so stripped down and bare bones of a thing, they might as well have just released it without dialogue as a straight-up mood piece. That's not a criticism, just a description. The film finds John Rambo an even more haunted figure than ever, a worldly, hulking beast of a man living like a mythic creature or some kind of animal ghost operating a boat in the Malaysian jungle. When a group of missionaries he helps transport to Burma are abducted by a terrorist army, he reluctantly teams with a group of mercenaries to rescue them and, kills the shit out of a bunch of guys to do so. It's very nearly an abstract film in terms of how little the plot matters and how dialed in it is to the rhythms of what's meant to be Rambo's own damaged, living only in the moment psyche, and where other installments focused on his predatory hunter skills and combat strategy, this time his big climactic hero move is to commandeer a 50 cal truck-mounted machine gun and just buzzsaw the entire goddamn battlefield in half. Just so we're clear, this is probably the second best Rambo movie on average. The ending of Part 4 implied that Rambo finally heads home to the yet unseen, barely acknowledged distant family he was originally sort of maybe walking toward in the original film, since this was supposed to be Stallone tying off the bow on the other big action franchise, but then he spent the better part of the last decade almost making a 5th film before ultimately setting on what is now slipped into theaters as Last Blood. Maybe this time will finally be the end of John Rambo for real, and we'll finally be able to get a real summation of what it is our absurd, half-mad, self-hating yet narcissistic national psyche has pumped into this beefy vessel for almost 40 years, and what it said about us. Will there ever be a good live-action Dragon Ball movie? The world, well, parts of it, holds its breath in anticipation. Sure, at this point, seeing anime and manga make their way faithfully to live-action features is nowhere near as uncommon as it once was. Hell, last year, even JoJo's Bizarre Adventure got there thanks to Takeshi Miike.
一家皆殺した。その悪意が愛する家族に迫る。
俺がこの町を守りますよ。グレートです。
But Dragon Ball has always proved a particularly difficult nut to crack. Akira Toriyama's sci-fi fantasy comedy has always faced an uphill climb of being at once very grounded in incentives of distinctly Eastern folklore and pop culture trope, making it a difficult sell to Westerners until they get to the whole tournament thing, while also generally refusing to follow the popular anime and manga trends of its own day. And it wasn't until the sequel series Dragon Ball Z that it truly broke mainstream outside Japan. To date, the only significant attempt at the big screen for Son Goku and company was the dreadful Dragon Ball Evolution, which definitely existed. Hardcore Dragon Ball fans, of course, are also likely aware of Dragon Ball The Magic Begins, an unlicensed Taiwanese feature adaptation of the original series produced in 1991 and hurriedly dubbed and reissued to the US when DBZ finally blew up stateside in the 90s. It was a thing. But while The Magic Begins is more generally well known, largely because Hong Kong and Taiwanese DVD imports were big business in late 90s video store game, believe it or not, it wasn't the only unofficial bootleg live-action Dragon Ball feature to be produced in East Asia in that period. 1 year earlier, an ambitious crew in South Korea had assembled to produce Dragon Ball Swara Son Goku, Iora Son Goku, or Dragon Ball Fight Son Goku, Win Son Goku, which, unlike The Magic Begins, had not been officially distributed worldwide and is still very hard to get your hands on physically, but is nonetheless regarded by many fans as the most faithful adaptation of Dragon Ball to live action to date. Which is not the same thing as saying it's any good, but, you know, baby steps. Directed by Rong Wang, evidently a mainstay jack-of-all-trades in Korean TV and low-budget action features of the day, and a one-time collaborator of future Dragon Wars Helmer Hyung Rae-shin, and utilizing a cast of fellow mid-tier stars with props, costumes, and gear partly scavenged from other local film and TV productions, it has all of the, let's say, charm one expects from what's effectively copyright-skirting for-profit film production of the type that thrived in this era, i.e. mostly shot outside or in neutral generic locations. The inconsistency between the production design is non-existent, leading to tokusatsu-style armored villains in one scene and Bulma tooling around in just a regular mid-1980s Hyundai in another, or crude cell animation for the Kamehameha blasts, but a mildly impressive full-size creature puppet for Master Roshi's turtle, and left-field fan service like one of Dragon Ball Z's Saiyan villains showing up early just because, and for some reason it's Nappa. Beyond that, though, it is unquestionably Dragon Ball, which is to say a Gonzo Ramana Clef takeoff on Journey to the West, but instead of a Buddhist monk meeting the Monkey King while questing for religious scrolls, it's Gadget Master Girl Bulma Briefs, teaming up with the superhuman feral child Son Goku. Oh, yeah, by the way, the only good copy I have of this has no subtitles, so yeah. To collect the 7 Dragon Balls and summon a wish-granting dragon ahead of the henchmen of the evil Emperor Pilaf. They meet the horn dog Kung Fu Hermit Master Roshi and get a magic cloud. Team up with the formerly villainous shapeshifter Oolong and the desert bandit Yamcha. Get waylaid by a misunderstanding involving their enemies, the Ox King and his daughter Chi-Chi. And eventually there's a showdown, a dragon, a jet ski chase, a battle in a sand quarry, Oolong using the Kamehameha. Well, I mean, you know, they say it's the most faithful Dragon Ball adaptation, I guess, so not knowing what to do for the end of an arc is kind of appropriate. Like I said, it'd be dishonest to call this thing good, but especially for Dragon Ball fans, it is pretty damn entertaining. Helpfully, compressing more or less the entirety of the Pilaf saga into a single 1 hour and 40-minute feature means it really moves. Just one fight scene, comedy bit, plot point, or new character introduction after another. And while it's cheap, they did put the work in. Obviously, the more extreme fantasy creatures and giant dinosaurs and such that filled out the obstacle to collecting the various balls in the manga and anime weren't feasible, but the repurposed Sentai and Kamen Rider style armored henchmen get used creatively enough.
Yeah!
And the two big stompy robots are especially impressive, especially the Transformers-looking one Oolong first appears disguised as. On the other hand, how can you not laugh when their solution to Poir turns out to be, do they make dolls of that? We'll just use one of those.
뭐라고?
Alright, so if you want to watch this yourself, well, that's unfortunately a little tricky. There was no official subbed or dubbed release worldwide, particularly in the West, and it only ever saw sale on VHS in Korea in the 90s, and those copies can't be legally manufactured anymore because Korea and Japan respect one another's copyrights now, mostly. But like almost every other lost movie, yeah, it's not that hard to track down, and if you love all things Dragon Ball, I imagine you'll have you'll have a time with it.
So you might remember back when Cats the movie came out, I made a joke out of using clips from a 2017 Hong Kong comedy called MEOW instead of the actual movie, because I thought it would be funny, and I guess it was. But mostly it led to a bunch of you asking me to do a thing about what the hell MEOW was. Because it looked so goddamn bizarre, and as far as I know, it was never significantly released or advertised here in the West. And I sort of figured, well, I can probably get around to that because Cats will still be a fresh joke in a month or two, but, well, holy shit, the movie-going public actually went and surprised me this time by standing up with one loud collective voice and saying no to Cats. So I kind of put revisiting this on hold for a bit, but now, since we're in this new sudden zone where Uncanny Valley CGI movie characters are part of the discourse again because the movie-going public got right back on their bullshit and made the absolutely terrible Sonic the Hedgehog movie a hit, so great, now I've got to watch 3 to 6 more of those goddamn things over the next decade, and now this week people are fascinated by the seemingly maybe too much CGI work that went into creating the newest version of Call of the Wild, where the main character of a dog was performed by CGI motion capture actor Terry Notary, acting opposite Harrison Ford instead of using a trained actual dog, which admittedly sounds strange and is used to very deliberately hyper-real and painterly, not quite animation, but not quite photorealistic effect for the actual film, but we'll talk about that when the movie comes out. Anyway, weirdly unreal computer-generated furry animals are back in the conversation. Okay, let's do an episode about MEOW. And also because, as you can tell, my vocal cords still aren't totally healed yet, and video clip heavy episodes let me talk less. Okay. MEOW is a 2017 family comedy from Hong Kong, which, remember, is distinct both as a country, political entity, and especially film industry from the rest of mainland China, although there is significant crossover between the two. Produced as part of a long-running and lucrative collaboration between superstar actor Louis Koo and blockbuster director Benny Chan. According to the film's production history, the concept of the film was hatched when Koo stated that he wanted to make a comedy on the subject of cats, and that they ultimately concluded in order for a cat-based film to be funny, the cat would have to be, and I'm quoting directly from the translation here, very, very, very large. And if you're thinking, that sounds like a really broad canvas that could conceivably encompass any cat of unusual size joke you could think to fit into it, welcome to the live-action family comedy world of Hong Kong, where humor often skews very, very young, decisively toward the visual, and the aesthetic and performances often deliberately suggest a cartoon comic strip logic. MEOW is a movie about a big silly cat, and everything from the plot to the other characters are essentially objects for the big silly cat to humorously collide with and bounce off of. As to the story, planet MEOW, inhabited by a race of hyper-intelligent warrior felines, is tired of dealing with the frequency of meteor strikes in their area of space. For eons, their leaders have schemed to invade and conquer the primitive human world of Earth instead, and have dispatched many advanced colonial troops for this purpose. But after early success in establishing themselves as gods in ancient Egypt, there has been no further contact. Seeking to restart these efforts in the present, the Emperor dispatches MEOW's fiercest warrior, Pudding,
西米露，而家命令你馬上前往地球，聯繫潛伏咗幾千年嘅喵星勇士，發動侵略。喺地球，你要有呢個喵星神器傍身，先至可以保持勇士嘅能力。
to Earth with a Deus Ex Machina ultimate weapon that will allow him to both subjugate the humans and retain his superpowers and true Meowsian form while on the planet, but the weapon is accidentally lost on landing, and Pudding is forced to revert to the form of a normal Earth cat to survive, though he manages to retain his normal gigantic size because reasons. Look, it's funny because the cat is bigger than a cat should be is what they're hanging literally the entire movie on. You just kind of have to go with it. Anyway, the actual hook is that Louis Koo is playing the well-meaning but sort of stupid hapless dad to a struggling family. His wife is an out-of-work model, his son wants to make YouTube movies, his daughter needs a leg operation, and he used to be a famous soccer goalie, but now he's retired and can't make money hustling crummy inventions and gets easily conned by other dumb hustlers. He agrees to cat sit for a rich friend without actually meeting the special cat named Shashale he's supposed to look after, and when he encounters the now transformed Pudding, he assumes this must be it. So he takes the giant alien home, and there you go. Now we got a movie, right? The funny family thinks they got a big goofy pet. The alien cat tries to go about its conquest mission, but gets into hijinks instead. What, did you think this would play out somehow significantly different or more sophisticated because it has subtitles? People in China want something harmless and stupid to distract their kids for 2 hours, just like you do. The whole world makes them watch us a lot of movies just as bad as Sonic the Hedgehog. They just usually don't send them to us. We send them ours, though, for some reason. But yeah, apart from some very lightweight satire, when Shashalai calls a meeting of the other Meowsian sleepers on Earth and discovers that, well, as far as they're concerned, house cats live so pampered they did conquer the planet all those years ago.
你哋仲掛住玩？睇下你哋啲喵樣已經忘記咗嚟地球嘅任務啊！
其實我哋嘅主人都已經做晒貓奴啦，喺我眼中啊，佢只係個鏟屎官咋，某程度上都已經算侵略成功啦。
侵略地球咁攰，不如叫大王嚟地球揾住好人家收養啦，賣下萌。
MEOW is about what you'd expect, save that not every national cinema would throw this much money and live-action star power behind a kiddie cartoon logic of everyone finding the giant cat surprising, but like not that surprising. So we get the part where the cat tries to still be a scary alien invader and fails miserably. And it fights some burglars. And of course the little girl, who admittedly is one of the cutest and most immediately endearing movie kids I've seen in this kind of role in a while, immediately loves the cats and wants it to be her friend. and there's a part where they dress the cat up like a person for a parent-teacher meeting. Ultimately, the second act is a long stretch of have the cat do things sequences involving Shashalai becoming a viral star and then a commercial pitchman. Then the dad losing all the money again to con man because more reasons. And if you've seen a movie before and guessed at the beginning, I bet the cat decides not to conquer the planet and uses his powers to fix the kid's leg instead. Well, yeah, look, the target audience for this movie just wants to laugh at the big adorable cat, okay? While obviously aimed at mainly entertaining children as a finished film, the production MEOW was chiefly a showcase for the technical capabilities of One Cool Film Production Limited, a production company owned by star Louis Koo, invested in producing big-budget special effects-heavy films for the Chinese market. Koo, who says that one of his main inspirations for entering the film business in the first place was becoming fixated on Star Wars as a kid, long believed that Chinese films and actors could become the dominant force in theatrical sci-fi, and has purchased numerous FX and makeup companies to push the genre forward himself. The giant cat effects in MEOW, for example, were accomplished by a mix of techniques. The body, arms, and legs were mainly an actor in a large puppet suit, while the head and tail were animated with full CGI in post-production. The film is not exactly a giant leap forward for the genre or storytelling in that regard, but as comedies for very young children go, it's actually pretty charming, and you certainly do get a lot of giant orange kitty cat business for your money. And if you're looking for something to get the little ones in the habit of reading subtitles for foreign films, or already are a multilingual household, it's definitely a unique item to check out. And if nothing else, now you know it exists. I imagine it's hard to imagine, given how hard the Walt Disney Corporation works at maintaining their illusion of continuity between the studio's big initial cultural moment as a cartoon pioneer in the pre-war era, pop culture omnipresence in the 50s and early 60s, 90s animation renaissance, and everything now. At one point, Disney was almost kind of done outside of the vacation resort and media company ownership scene, owing mostly to the decline in popularity of their animated features and feature-length animation in general throughout the 70s and early 80s. That's not to say that they or anyone else stopped making animated movies for theaters. In fact, there was a glut of the thing. Just that Disney had dominated the global market for so long that very few studios ever had the means or desire to actually set up a viable competitor at the same scale. So when the mouse ceased to be the 800-pound gorilla in the market instead of another gorilla replacing them, or like two 400-pound gorillas instead, it was more like a whole big barrel of significantly smaller monkeys, especially since home video, kids' TV, and cable were all coming into being around that same time, so there was now an economic afterlife for feature tunes produced on the cheap. But in the midst of this outlaw animation era, in between the passing of King Walt and the Renaissance, believe it or not, an anime company out of Japan boldly marched onto US shores and declared their intent to take over the American feature animation industry in Disney's sort of absence, and not the one you're thinking of, because they didn't exist yet.
K-I-T-T-Y, K-I-T-T-Y. Everybody say Hello Kitty.
No, it was Sanrio,
Yes, the Hello Kitty people, and in the mid to late 70s of Japan, they'd been making money hand over fist off not only the cat, who is in fact not a cat, but that's confusing enough on its own, but also off the anthology comic magazine aimed at young girls called Lyrica. And somehow, in what could only be described as a very uncharacteristic of Japanese corporate thinking of the era mentality, they decided that being flush with capital meant they could roll the dice on becoming the new Disney, putting money into Murakami Wolf's production of The Mouse and His Child in 1977, and randomly that same year acquiring the US distribution rights to a heartwarming documentary feature produced and narrated by Henry Winkler about an American couple who'd adopted special needs orphans from Vietnam titled Who Are the DeBolts and Where Did They Get 19 Kids? That film ended up winning Best Documentary Oscar that year, and a few months later, some very pleased with themselves Sanrio executives started calling press conferences in New York and LA announcing their intent to fill the vacuum in big-time global feature animation and to take over the US comic book industry by publishing an American version of Lyrica.
Not a great plan.
You can probably guess why the plan to upend and then dominate the American comic book business with phone book-sized anthology magazines printed in full watercolor aimed at teenage girls did not work out for Sanrio without me going into too much detail, and if you do want more info, there's actually a first-hand account of it here. Either way, the company had been convinced all along that turning the already rapidly expanding Japanese anime business loose on the global market from a Hollywood base of operations was the real key to claiming Uncle Walt's hypothetically vacant throne. Sanrio was determined to make a movie, but not a movie like any of the decidedly Japan-centric manga-influenced features that other anime studios had already been producing, some quite successfully since the 1960s. Sanrio wanted to be Disney, which to them meant not only big and with lots of fanfare, but also with style and subject that held global box office appeal and respect, by which they meant to American and global consumers of American Western colonialist popular culture. And thus, the plan they settled on was to make their own version of Fantasia. Okay, so in 2020 that probably sounds like a good idea, right? Because Fantasia's great. Who doesn't like Fantasia? It's one of Disney's classic movies, one of the most creative accomplishments in the studio canon, if not animation history. Sorcerer's Apprentice costume is one of Mickey's most iconic alternate designs. They did a sequel in 2000. Holy shit, that incredible Night on Bald Mountain part. Fantasia's a winner. Well, Fantasia was not actually successful originally when it came out in 1940. Now granted, World War not even a year later didn't really help, nor did the special theater and sound technology required to show it optimally, but nearly 2-hour experimental film, mainly comprised of classical music and wordless, often avant-garde animated short subject, clashed with both the mood of the times and with the folksy guy who gets regular Americans image Walt Disney had already been cultivating for himself and his company. In fact, the Fantasia experiment not really working out as successfully as the Snow White experiment had is sometimes seen as the first realization he'd had that Walt Disney the man was going to become in some ways trapped within the Walt Disney persona. In any case, the reason Fantasia is remembered as a success now is largely because Walt was able to rehabilitate its reputation later, along with other features that met with mixed reception upon initial release, like Alice in Wonderland for example, by showing segments from it as short subjects on his popular weekly Wonderful World of Disney TV broadcasts, most notably the Bald Mountain and Sorcerer's Apprentice segments, which is how that look wound up being an iconic recurring Disney Parks mascot feature. They also re-released it a bunch of times. Oh, and one other thing. Also, the movie got a huge pop culture boost on the college repertory revival screening circuit in the mid-60s, all the way right up through when Sanrio was making this decision because, well, the LSD and or weed at a midnight movie crowd had figured out that being 2 hours worth of loud classical music and avant-garde animation, the recognizable parts of which involved rainbow centaurs, a giant devil, and Mickey Mouse doing magic, made Fantasia a great movie to watch while tripping balls.
I can see the music.
So anyway, Sanrio decided to hinge their fortunes on ripping off something that took 30 years to become popular for the wrong reason. You guys all get that like 80 to 90% of the reason all the 70s, 80s, and 90s entertainment stories I tell you on this show are more interesting than the same kind of stories from now is that today everyone has like actual psych meds and back then it was only cocaine, right? Just checking. So the plan was to do anime Fantasia, but mostly the Greek mythology part, because, of course, that's the one the anime guys went for. Specifically, 5 retellings of the Grecian myth from the collection of Roman poet Ovid, titled Metamorphoses, which would also be the title of the film, which in turn would feature a nameless animated boy and girl character portraying the main male and female protagonist of each story, presented as in Fantasia, animated only to music with no dialogue or narration. But whereas Disney's film utilized classical pieces, Sanrio envisioned their selling point as setting the action to cutting-edge rock and roll, commissioning apparently apparently at some expense, new songs by the likes of Mick Jagger and Joan Baez, and they really plan to use every minute of those songs because 170 Los Angeles area animators toiled for 3 years putting Metamorphoses together, and apparently a lot of the late period directing eventually came down to stretch it out, we need to get most of these songs in. So most of this movie is just this random kid in various costumes walking a lot for a long time, or the camera panning over background paintings for a longer time. I don't care how good these songs were, they can't make this interesting. Oh, the myths in question, by the way, are Perseus and Medusa, Actaeon and Diana, the House of Envy, Orpheus in the Underworld, and Phaeton. So yeah, 1 adventure story and 3 dreary tragedies. Interesting choice. Of course, you can't see what this was like with the music, because that version hasn't been seen by anyone since its premiere in 1978. Where it was so badly received, as in like the audience walked out in droves, press reporting a catastrophic dud, what have you idiots done and how much of our money did you spend on it, a complete disaster, that the entire plan was scrapped overnight and became something else.
The heavens. We came out of them riding on this earth of ours, and we move under them and through them every day of our life. But there are all kinds of heavens. There's the astronomer's heaven, and the rocket's heaven, and the heaven of religion.
Metamorphoses was no more. The film was retitled The Winds of Change, cut down to a lean 85 minutes, the songs were thrown out and replaced by a wall-to-wall disco orchestration by the great Alikar Konstantinos, which is actually pretty good in and of itself, and barely has anything to do with the on-screen action though, which is awkward.
Pluto knows Orpheus is looking for his bride, but it'll take some very special pleading to spring her from hell.
And actor Peter Ustinov was brought in to narrate the action. Not, let me be clear, in any sense that he's telling the story or even reading from the original Ovid. He's literally just describing what's supposed to be happening at that moment in the movie, and being kind of a little sarcastic about it.
Pretty good mountain climbing for a kid. This is at least a 45-degree slope, and he's not even wearing crampons. Well, this is none other than Athena, daughter of the great Zeus himself. Perseus, if you have any hope of finding Medusa, you must not look directly at her, or you'll be turned to stone. Also, you'll need a shield. Take mine. For a trained musician, he certainly is careless with that instrument. Wait a minute. This can't be Medusa? This doll? Now, why would anybody want to badmouth a charming young lady like this?
Seriously, that's his real delivery for the whole thing. It's like even he's bored and doesn't want to be watching this.
It would be hard to tell from this aspect that you are looking at a genuine goddess. Perseus is apparently in no hurry to get anywhere, although we happen to know that he's bound for the palace of a no-goodnik king named Polydectes on the island of Seriphos, in case you want to stay away from there. Blonde, pure blonde, and that's very rare in Greece. So what's all this souvlaki everybody's been giving out about serpents in her hair? Why, she's the prettiest thing on the peninsula, and demure, too. These are the two sisters of Medusa. You can see a certain family resemblance. It's scandalous when two asses try to make an ass of their master. Right off, she recognizes Actaeon, the mighty hunter, and she assumes from his gaping that he must be a dirty young man.
So of course this version also failed. Yeah, it's been released to DVD and VHS once in the US and Japan. You can't even find the Metamorphoses version, I've looked. Sanrio went back to Japan defeated, but obviously not too badly since Hello Kitty and Company are still a multi-billion-dollar global business, and their subsequent Japan-produced anime features of the late 70s like Unico and The Ring Bell were actually pretty successful. Not this, though. This was bad. Really bad. And it was pretty much the start and finish of anyone trying to pull the crown off Disney, because once the mid-80s rolled in and the wheels were in motion for a comeback, and of course so much more absurd stuff happened in late 70s LA, hardly anyone remembers Sanrio's big flame out. But this occurred, and it was almost a different world. I'm Bob, and that's the big picture.